If you're a fan of fantasy RPGs, we need to talk about Dragons Dogma II. I know this sounds like it's a mobile advertisement that any second I'm gonna start yelling about Raid Shadow Legends. I promise I'm not. Dragons Dogma II is coming out March 22nd of 2024. It's just a couple months away, and I've only lately been taking a much closer look at this game, and it truly looks like it could be one of the most incredible action fantasy RPGs that I've seen ever. And this is coming from someone who is brand new to the series, who is only for the first time appreciating the different systems and mechanics that Dragons Dogma has to offer. So if I am slightly off about a couple things, please do be gentle. I'm learning. But that's one of the awesome things about Dragons Dogma 2 is they understand it's been about 10 years since the first game. Even if you've played it, you might have forgotten a lot that it has to offer. So the game does start off with the main character, you, with amnesia, with characters around you that can help explain the world and explain certain aspects to catch you up to speed. I believe it was said that Dragons Dogma 2 takes place in the same world but on a different plane than the first game as well. So there are reasons why it makes sense to be introduced to the game for the first time. For someone like us, like me, to be grandfathered into this franchise, and I appreciate that. So whether you're exploring the open world with your D&D-like party called pawns, creating your own class by mixing and matching a variety of archetypes called vocations, one of which is something I've truly never seen in a game like this before, or climbing the backs of massive titans akin to Shadow of the Colossus, a game I still think is one of the best ever made, Dragons Dogma 2 has the staples of what you're looking for in an open world fantasy game and puts plenty of unique twists on top to create a visceral looking experience you really can't get anywhere else. This isn't going to necessarily be in everything we know about the game, but it is going to go through all the stuff you need to know if you're new to the franchise like me, and some of the highlights of what makes this title absolutely unique. And it all begins with character creation. Dragons Dogma 2 has one of the most incredible character creation systems I've seen in any game, period. You can go ahead and tweak every single detail from scratch if your heart desires, or you can dive into a very user-friendly looking system that lets you create dynamic and different templates that you could then go in and handcraft to your heart's desire. Step 1, you pick either a masculine or a feminine body type in any of the offered races, one of which is brand new to the series. They're a cat-like race you can go off and explore the world as. Step 2, of those body types, you pick one of 9 different body builds. And then step 3, you choose faces that utilize almost 100 different real-life face scans and then tweak to your heart's content. In the IGN early preview, they even said that there were 12 different nose sliders that you could go through and customize. The detail is insane. The first boss of the game is literally getting through the character creator itself. I don't believe it's yet been confirmed, but one detail that was pretty cool in the original Dragon's Dogma was that your height and weight did play an impact on gameplay. The taller that you were, the more it would impact your weapon reach and your overall run speed, and the heavier you were would affect your overall stamina drain and regeneration, which is another detail most fantasy RPGs don't take into account. Once your character is made, you could hop into one of the different classes, which are called vocations in Dragon's Dogma. On the surface level, you do have your typical fighter, your stealthy thief, a bow-wielding ranger, and a mage. Nothing too crazy. There is one particular class, though, that stands out completely amongst the rest and is a testament to how the developers are trying to do unique and innovative gameplay mechanics in a fairly saturated genre. This vocation is called the Trickster. Instead of dealing direct combat damage to enemies, they have the opportunity to manipulate them by creating illusions such as a clone that will trigger aggro on the enemies. Using this clone, you could place it over an illusory platform that enemies will perceive as solid ground and watch as they hysterically leap trying to go after your clone. You could also use the clone and move it around the battlefield to get it into advantageous tactical positions where your fellow pawns or companions can take advantage of, using environmental hazards, for example. And the gameplay that has been shown off so far exemplified the importance of the environment and the weight that the developers put into crafting it, as we see certain dynamic interactions such as blowing up this dam that sends a troll down the the river, where players were able to attack and crawl on top of it and do massive amounts of damage. But as a support class, the Trickster has some other tricks up their sleeve. You can buff the power of your party so that they deal increased damage, or one of the more powerful abilities was creating this illusion of a dragon that puts enemies into a fear state, leaving them vulnerable for your companions to take complete advantage of. And this is just one way that the developers of Dragons Dogma II are trying to make the game feel unique. Things get a lot more interesting when you get into some of the unique hybrid classes such as the Mystic Spearhead or the Magic Archer. Some really cool abilities have been shown off for both of those, such as this AoE magic archery attack. And the combat itself is where things start to get even more interesting. A lot of RPGs these days don't really emphasize strengths and weaknesses of a particular class. Many are actually going into this sort of hybrid, do a little bit of everything type system that I personally feel takes away from some of the excitement of playing these classes. But Dragons Dogma II, each of the vocations plays completely differently, and you need to take that into account based on who you're traveling with. So for example, the mage cannot just be left on their own to cast powerful spells if you're playing as a fighter. You will need to take the time to defend them so they can have the opportunity to cast some of their more powerful spells. So carefully picking the pawns or companions that you travel with for the sake of creating synergies between the abilities that you all have is important on its own, but it goes a layer deeper when you realize that pawns actually have unique knowledge and insight into the world around you that does grow and develop and change over time. For example, you can have a pawn that knows a specific enemy type, which will point out weak spots or particular spells that are effective against that enemy. And we are going to talk about pawns more in just a bit, but combat goes beyond just your typical stabbing or shooting spells, as you can see in the gameplay actively climbing on top of enemies in order to attack some of those weak points. As you climb on top of these creatures, they will try to throw you off, they will react to the areas where you're doing damage to them, and if they're flying, they might even try to fly away with you, and hopefully your companions are around to catch you when you fall off. Pawns are interesting on their own because each of them are completely unique from one another. You do create a pawn for yourself, and that has a special bond with you, the main character. Others can be recruited throughout the world to go on adventuring excursions with you, or you could even recruit pawns from other players' games. Likewise, you can send your pawn into other games to explore and gain knowledge of the world that can then be brought back to you. A pawn that goes into other players' games might learn about the weak spots on enemies that I mentioned before, and they could bring that knowledge back to you when you play the game again yourself. To me, it's one of the most unique social systems in a game of this type that I've ever seen. And mind you, this was all done 10 years ago. And your pawns too will develop over the course of the game based on your actions, and they'll develop what's called inclinations. These inclinations are what help them feel more and more diverse from one another. It could be something as simple as they heal more often than others, they might go directly for more treasure, or they might even target specifically the weakest enemy right off the bat when they get into combat. All of this works to create a really unique and dynamic combat system where it's not just about the abilities your party has, but it's about what they can actually offer your party as a whole, very much like D&D. In between combat encounters, you'll be exploring the vast open world, taking on quests, exploring the main story, meeting NPCs, delving into dungeons, exploring cities, all through a seamless experience with no loading screens whatsoever. The world is big and ambitious and filled with encounters to come across, but that doesn't mean you have to run across the entirety of it every single time. You could take transportation like the ox cart. The ox cart allows you to sit in the back of a carriage while you travel across the landscape. You can choose to rest your eyes to fast travel to where you want to go, or you could immersively go from point A to point B, dealing with any random encounters that might happen along the way, very much like a normal D&D encounter. And then there is, of course, a full day-night cycle in the game, and certain enemies will only emerge at night, and it is completely pitch black. You can barely see in front of you. You will hear the enemies around you. You will not necessarily be able to see them. It's honestly a bit terrifying looking. And with all of this, I am merely scratching the surface of what Dragons Dogma II has to offer. There's some really cool smaller features. For example, once again highlighting the importance of your party composition, the developer showed off an instance where the party went into an elvish settlement and nobody could speak Elvish, so you couldn't understand what they were saying. If you had someone in your party that understood the language, it would automatically translate for you, but that's just yet another consideration that adds depth and that other games typically don't do Usually everyone speaks common. It's super cool for a nerd like me. If there is anything that's really cool that I missed, be sure to let others and myself know down in the comments section below. I'm very much excited to learn more about this franchise. Thank you all so much for watching. If you like fantasy RPGs, consider sticking around. And as always, I hope to see all you dudes in the next video. So long, everybody.